Hello, everybody. Sandra Adelaja here from Kyiv, Ukraine. I want to use this opportunity to welcome all of you and to invite you to inform your friends and family members that this is the topic. This is the conversation that we've started a few days ago on the main question, or one of the main questions of our civilization. Are black people cursed? Are black African people cursed? Are African people cursed? Are we under some form of curse or the other? So I want us to invite our friends and go and share this message. We have started, this conversation for some days now, and today I'm going to talk about the first civilization in our world, which is a black civilization or Ethiopian civilization. So this Samuel's book is for it. So are black African people cursed? And today's topic, Ethiopia, the first civilization in the world. Ethiopia, the first civilization in the world. The connection is not possible. Ethiopia, the first civilization in the world. Okay, if you are ready, here we go. Now, I've already told you about the criteria for civilization last lesson. In the last class, that was yesterday, we spoke about the criteria for civilization. What is it? What is civilization? And what leads to civilization? How do you know if a people is civilized or not? And what are the things that are required for a people and a nation to be civilized? And number one is that nation has to have writing. So it has to have committed its culture into writing. Number two, that culture has to have scholarship. That is research, writing, and history, preservation of history, and education, that is scholarship. Then apart from scholarship, that culture must have science and scientific method of cross-checking and verifying information, and even their own culture and their own history there must be a method of affirming that history and that culture is based on truth, not just on myth and on legends. When we prove that, apart from that, you also have there is a difference between culture and instincts and survival instincts. We also spoke about that, but these are the main things. And one of the main criteria, of course, for a nation to be called civilized is the amount of people that are living in the city, and the city development, and the amount of population that are involved in city life. Another factor of civilization is the development of industry or metal and iron, and those factors are the things that really make us to know who are the nations and what are the nations that are developed. So right now I'm going to talk about Ethiopia, but when we talk about Ethiopia, I'm not really talking about the Ethiopia of today. I'm not talking about the country that is called Ethiopia. Yes, that is part of the Ethiopia we are talking about, but Ethiopia in the olden time, in the ancient time, is more than just one country. Ethiopia, the original country that was called Ethiopia, was not a country. This European came and messed up Africa, divided it into pieces. But before then, it was just the old black race that was called Ethiopia. But the center of that civilization was in the present-day Sudan. The present-day Sudan. It used to be called Ethiopia or Nubia. So, and it was from Nubia that people moved up to Ethiopia of today, and they retained that name, the old name that they were calling Sudan. It was the Arabs that came there and changed the name to Sudan, but it was, it was Ethiopia at that point. So the black people that moved out to the north to the present Ethiopia, they retained that name. But you see, a lot of black nations will tell you that they can trace their origin to Sudan. It was from that civilization of Sudan that my people, for example, the Yoruba people moved when you tell the story of the Yoruba people, a lot of them would trace their ancestry to Sudan area. Ijebu people, for example, most definitely know that they are from Sudan. So it was the civilization of the black race, and it was from that civilization that a lot of them moved over to different parts of Africa, the black people. So anyway, and that is actually the same place where they found the highest level of archaeological proof of human. So when we talk about black people, I mean, here the black people and Africa being the cradle of human civilization and the origin of man, when they talk about it originating from Ethiopia, we are not talking about the present Ethiopia. We are actually talking about the Ethiopia that was of old, Ethiopia of old that was in Nubia area. So that is the place where that is where you could connect to Nile, to that area of Nile and all that. So that is where people say is the place where you could trace the origin of humanity, where the first men, the human, live. So we're going to talk about that to show us that the source of civilization, the very first civilization in the entire world, was based in Africa, and which was the Ethiopian civilization. So now let's get acquainted with Let's get acquainted with this greatest civilization that developed in Africa even before the advent of the Egyptian kingdom. Yes, this is important because one of the most popular civilization that people know from Africa is the Egypt civilization, or the Egyptian civilization, the Egypt kingdom. And we also know that the ancient Egypt was black as well, but they also came from Nubia. The early Egyptians, they came from Nubia, they came from Ethiopia, they moved from the north, from the south, and but we are talking of a civilization that preceded the Egyptian civilization. So that is what I want to tell you about today. Although a number of scientists, there are few scientists, but the problem of the black man is that when the African was colonized, they didn't develop their own history, and they didn't do research, and they were under subjection and under colonization and slavery. So there was the history of the black race was suppressed, and a lot of the historians that came to Europe, that came from Europe, were actually manipulating a lot of facts to justify colonization and to justify the humanization of another human being through slavery. That's why they did not pay attention. They couldn't even believe it, that Africa would be the cradle of humanity and the origin of civilization. So they would rather tell stories of civilization coming from Asia or coming from India, but they just neglected Africa. But since though, science has since developed, and research and mechanism to do research and more credible researches have been done, and archaeological researches and historical researches have been done, and that has all long led to a general view worldwide that yes, Africa is the root of, is the origin of civilization and of humanity as a whole. So, but still, there might still be a few number of scientists that believe that the ancient civilization were either Egypt or West Africa, or West Asia and India. The conclusion to which the world of science in general, the larger, like 80% of the science world, especially the world of anthropology and archaeology, the 80% of the world has come to the conclusion that science has come to the conclusion that Egypt and the Egyptian and Asian civilization came from a more ancient general civilization. This is indicated by the similarities that are inherent in both regions. So there is a similarity that is common to the source of civilization, and that commonality was found in Africa. The archaeologist and Orientalist Wallis Budge developed this idea in such a way that it will be incorrect to state what the Egyptians borrowed from the Sumerians or that the Sumerians borrowed from the Egyptians, but rather one can be sure that both peoples borrowed their theological systems from one common but much more ancient source. Because these Sumerians are actually a form of black people also that also migrated from Africa to Asia, and just like the ancient Sumerians and Egyptians. Similarities of their religious system are too identical to be just a coincidence. American archaeologist and Egyptologist James Henry Breasted, for his part, points out to similarities between Babylon and Egypt is using the number 360 based on the number of days. So they were, these people are using the number of days. Even if you go to Ethiopia today, you will discover that their New Year is different. It's much more like that of Israel, and because they had their own civilization before all of that, so they maintain their writing, and the writing that Ethiopia maintains is different from the English writing or the Latin writing, because it was the old ancient writing that was in civilization, in the African civilization. They maintain it up to today. So their alphabet is totally different. Their count, their calendar count is totally different. And they were the ones who started using this 360. And thank God for the current Ethiopia, because they proved that, as a matter of fact, that it's easier to trace the history, that yes, they have their writing and they have the count of calendar, and and it is on the basis of that Europe now developed the 365 days a year as the number of days in a year. So based on the number of days in the ancient form of the calendar of both regions, which is extremely important to dividing the cycle, and subsequently in geography, astronomy, and time measurement. Although this approach has also been implemented earlier in Egypt, there is an obvious common source, more ancient than those two civilizations of Sumerians, Asians, and Egypt. So where is it coming from? British scientist George Sewell notes the existence of a great civilization, the scientific elements of which have already been subsequently used by ancient civilizations, which have preserved written records. He was very interested to know what kind of civilization it was. A number of scientists finally were able to discover that the first civilization in the world was created by a people known as Ethiopians. Like I said, we are not talking about the Ethiopians of today, but they are part of it, but we are talking about a greater number of people, the black people, which was located in Nubia, the modern-day Sudan. A prosperous civilization developed in that region, called in the Bible by the country of Kush or Hush. So that is another name for Ethiopia at that time, or for black people, Kush or Hush, and marked on today's maps as Sudan, you see. Ancient Greek historian Diodorus of Sicily, this was before Christ, 90 years before Christ, he lived between 90 to 30 years before Christ. So this was before Christ. Wrote that Kushites, these are the black people, were of the opinion that their country had not only been the birthplace of the human race and the cradle of the first civilization in the world, but also the location of Eden, where, according to the Bible, all life on earth began. So they knew that time that they were, it was from their place that the Garden of Eden, it was in their area that the Garden of Eden was, and that civilization came from them. So this was before Christ came. They already knew this. According to the Bible and its interpretations, the peoples of the Northeast Africa, Ethiopians, Meroites, Kushites, Getulas, and some peoples of the Middle East, the Sabaeans, the Hadramaut tribes, originated from Kush, Ham's son, and his descendants. You say not Ham, but Ham's son. It is Kush that is one of the sons of Noah, one of the grandsons of Noah, and a son to Ham that inherited Africa, and that are the descendants of that were called the Kush or the Ethiopians. the famous Jewish historian Josephus Flavius, who lived 37 to 100 years after the death of Christ, lists the peoples of Kush, son of Ham and grandson of Noah, as those few area tribes that retain their names in unchanged form. You see, you could even trace the Bible and confirm and affirm the Bible thanks to the African people, because they did not change their name. Of the four sons of Ham, the name Kush was not affected by the disastrous influence of time, because the Ethiopians whom he ruled did not only call themselves Hushains or Kushites at the time of Flavius, but also received this name from all the inhabitants of Asia. So they were not changing. They did not change, even though the nations were changing, so time will change, but Ethiopians and Hushites remained and kept their names and their history linked to Noah, since the days of Noah. British journalist and writer Lady Lugard describes that in ancient history, the glory of the Ethiopians was ubiquitous. So that was the tower of glory of the black race, of the Kushites, of the Ethiopians. It was unprecedented. It was unequal. Herodotus describes them as the tallest, most beautiful, and the oldest of all human races. And if you look at especially if you go to South Sudan, you will see them that they are very dark, tall, elegant, because that is the oldest of all human race, and they are the darkest. That's why they are dark like that. The ancient Greek poet Homer, that is the one of the most, I think is the most popular ancient writer, right? Literature. That was 8 centuries before Christ. Described them, that is 800 years before Christ, described the Kushites and the Ethiopians, already 800 years before Christ, as the most pious of people. Can you believe it? The most pious of people, black people. So black people, know yourselves. Know yourselves, guys. Pets of the gods. That is how Homer described the black race. The annals of all the great ancient countries of Asia Minor, are full of descriptions of the Ethiopians, because they related through trade, and some of them came from there originally. The Moses records of Moses often mention them, but although they are described as the most powerful, most pious, and most beautiful of human races, it has always been noted that they were black. And there is no doubt that at that time, the leading race of the Western world was a black race. The Ethiopians, who came from Upper Nubian and the Meroe Islands, were Negroes who inhabited vast areas from South Abyssinia to the equator. The translators of the Ethiopian version of the Bible, which was written 5th century after Christ, identified the country of Kush with Abyssinia, calling it Ethiopia. You see, so we have a record of the Bible, the Ethiopian Bible, which was written in their own language, as also calling Africa and that part of the world Kush and Ethiopia and Abyssinia. So they maintain the old names for black people. So far, in the language of Abyssinia, verse 31 in the 68th chapter Psalm sounds like this: Ethiopia will stretch its hands to God. And I think it's still the same in the King James Version, that Ethiopia will stretch its hands to God. That is during the times of the Psalm, during the time of King David. It was talking about Ethiopia stretching its hand to God. According to Homer and Herodotus, the inhabitants of these areas were in Ethiopia, Sudan, Egypt, Arabia, Palestine, Western Asia, India. So you see, all of these people, this is according to Homer, the most respected literature writer, and Herodotus. Those were the most respected Greek writers and historians. they recognize that black people control, the world, from Ethiopia to Sudan to Egypt to Arabia to Palestine to Western Asia and India. This is not East black people writing, so we could not change history. There's no way we can change history, and there's no way we could write it to favor ourselves now. No, this was written in the ancient Greek, in the olden time, from the Greek history. This is from the Greek history, giving credit to the fact that yes, there was a civilization of the black race that ruled on half of the world at that point. But that's not the only one. We are still going to go to show you other facts of how the black people ruled over Europe as well, and even America and Asia. Okay. The name Ethiopians was coined by the ancient Greeks when the Greeks began to contact the black inhabitants of Africa and Asia. You see, so our original name was Kush, but it was the Europeans that started calling us, the Greek started calling Africans Ethiopians. They nicknamed them burnt faces, which translates into Greek as Ethiopians. So in Greek language, because burnt faces like black, they call it Ethiopians, because that is the Greek way of calling black people. It's just like some people call Negro today. So that is not, the original, but before then, they called themselves Kushites. Professor Thomas Henry Huxley refers to the black Ethiopians as the creators of civilization. You see, they created civilization. So that's not a black man. That is an English professor. He who recognized it through studies, through science, and through scholarship. That yes, these are the people who created civilization. The civilizations of Egypt and the Euphrates, Tigris valleys developed from the already widespread Neolithic culture, which the scientist Grafton Elliott Smith, who is here now, calls the Elliotite sunstone, which is from the Ethiopia. It included practices such as circumcision, which is you could connect back and trace back to the instruction God gave to Abraham. Because how would they know? The strange custom of sending a father to bed when a child is born, known as kuvada. Massage practice, that was back then, there was massage practice. Mummies, the mummies that later on got to Egypt, but it started from there. Megalith boulders, example Stone Age, megalith builders, building from stone. The artificial deformation of young people's heads with the help of bandages. Tattoos, religious association of the sun and snakes. The use of symbols known as the swastika for good luck. The most important cultural elements of archaic civilization that the Ethiopians had founded, according to Professor John Jackson, were practice of agriculture involving irrigation, the carving of stone images, the use of stone, the use of stone for the construction of pyramids, dolmens, graves carved into rock, stone circles. These are all signs of developed culture. Metal working, pottery, practice of making mummies, worship of the great mother goddess, worship of heavenly bodies such as stars, planets, the moon and the sun. The ruling class was divided into two categories associated with the celestial world, claiming the connection of power with the gods and practicing incestuous unions associated with the underworld. Totemism, a religious and social system based on the cult of the so-called totem. Dual organization, both in the social and political spheres. The predominance of the maternal right, according to which the throne was passed on the maternal line. That's they still have that in Israel today. Presence of God's vicarious rulers. Thus, we could see that Ethiopia is a civilization that preceded all others and gave rise to those civilizations that followed it. As Professor Arnold Herren, a German historian, tells us, the remains of temples and pyramids are found on the site of the city of Meroe, which is in Sudan, which was the center of Ethiopian civilization. You see, the origin, most people know about pyramids in Egypt right now because they are the biggest. But the pyramids building did not start in Egypt. It started in Meroe. Meroe. There is a city, a whole city in Meroe where they had, I think, over 200 pyramids. In Egypt, I think they only had 70. You can only see 70 pyramids. But the smaller ones, smaller pyramids, there are over 200 that are discovered in Meroe. That is the place where the technology of building pyramids started from. And it was there, it was moved, those black people moved from Sudan, from Nubia, to Ethiopia, Ethiopia, and some of them moved to to Egypt. And that is why Egypt was being habited by black people. And it is those black people that built those pyramids that we see today. Because when the Arabs came, the pyramids were already there. When Europeans came, the pyramids were already there. And the proof of that is that there were similar pyramids down, up to today, they are still down in Sudan. And there are many more there, over 200 of them, that survived up to today. And they are older than the pyramids in Egypt. So, what this Professor Arnold Herren is confirming is telling us that the remains of those temples and pyramids are found on the site of the city of Meroe, which was the center of Ethiopian civilization, you say. Archaeologists were able to conclude that Meroe was the birthplace of pyramid architecture. Not me saying this. These are European scientists through archaeology that are confirming this. And only then this architecture was perfected in Egypt. In carving on the monuments, the carving on the monument, the drawings or the writing on the monuments in Meroe shows the people who already mastered the sphere of art, abounded with the blessings of civilization, and had a certain knowledge of science because they were already having writing. And you remember that is one of the criteria for civilization. You must have scholarship. So they have, and that is confirmed by writing and storage of information and research, and then by science. And even the building of pyramid proved the science of it, because without that science, there is no way the things could stand, and for so many years. It was here that hieroglyphics writing was first invented, you see. That's why those writings are still on those pyramids up to today in Sudan. This is the obligatory attribute of civilization, the necessity of which was considered above, which I spoke about yesterday. Next, we will consider in more details the basis of civilization that Egypt inherited from Ethiopia. So I'm going to talk later on about how Ethiopia taught Egypt civilization, how Ethiopia brought civilization to Egypt, how black men brought civilization to Egypt. So thank you so much, and let's go ahead and share this message. I would like us to share this message, and after that we'll go and see the video. But meanwhile, go and share the message, share. And besides sharing the message, please, I want you to join the mentorship program that I have online, which is free of charge. Go look for sundayadelajahblog.com/mentorship, and you could also come to do History Makers training with us by writing to hmt@godembassy.org, or go to sundayadelajahblog.com/hmt. Like for mentorship is /mentorship, for HMT is /HMT. If you want to go with us to Africa, to Nigeria, to develop Africa again, it's also sundayadelajahblog.com/Nigeria. And for those of you who want to get my books, you can read them for free on Kindle Unlimited, or you could buy them on Amazon. But if you want to buy physical books in bulk, You could write to my office. It will be cheaper than on Amazon. You could write to my office by writing to dssbooks@gmail.com. For those of you who might want to come for the History Makers training, just, write to HMT@godembassy.org, like I said. And yeah, we are going to end. I'm going to finish here, but I'm going to let you see the video so that you get some affirmation of what we're talking about.
Log on to patreon.com/Dane Calloway or paypal.me/Dane Calloway to support me, my channel, and my content. By demand, merchandise is now available at I'mJustHereToMakeYouThink.com.
I knew nothing about the American Indian, and that everything that we are taught about the American Indian is wrong. It's inaccurate. And our school books are hopelessly lacking, perhaps criminally lacking, in revealing what our relationship was with the Indian.
I'm tired. I'm really tired of the manipulation.
Also, what we've learned about the Indian has been largely taught to us by Hollywood and by motion pictures. They have educated us.
They have educated us.
Indians have been tragically misrepresented in films and in our history books, in our attitudes, in our reporting. So we must set about to re-educate ourselves. 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 So we must set about to re-educate ourselves.
They manipulate our history books. The history books are not true. It's a lie. That's right, Michael. The history books are lying.
The history books are lying.
You need to know that. You must know that.
When third world countries are misrepresented, they're likely to be valued less. When Mercator maps exaggerate the importance of Western civilization, when the top of the map is given to the Northern Hemisphere, and the bottom is given to the Southern, then people will tend to adopt top and bottom attitudes.
When we hear, as we've heard throughout all our lives, no matter how old we are, that we are a country that stands for freedom, for rightness, for justice, for everyone, it simply doesn't apply to those who are not white. It just simply doesn't apply. And we were the most rapacious, aggressive, destructive, torturing, monstrous people who swept from one coast to the other, murdering and causing mayhem among the Indians. When we say, especially, that we are going to keep our treaties, and that we do keep our word, and that we, above all people, do keep our word, I think it's important to mention that there have been nearly 400 treaties written by the United States in good faith with the Indians, and every single one of them was abrogated. It means broken or changed or altered.
Okay, everyone. Now, in this particular segment, I will be covering many details that is, of course, very essential to all Americans, and especially to those who are the direct descendants of the indigenous Aboriginal Niji of this land, now called North America. And before I go any further, allow me to acknowledge that I do totally understand that many of you may have heard either very little to no detail at all concerning this information that I'm about to present to you, merely due to the fact that you were lied to, like millions of others, no matter if they share the same hue of complexion with you or not. In many of my previous documentaries, I've shared various detailed information that was hidden to the public as to why multiple different things were purposely told to you in reverse. which leads me to my very first point of this segment, and that is, why was history told to you in reverse? Now, this question alone will be continuously answered throughout this particular segment and also throughout nearly all of my content that I present to the public. Reason being is due to how history is depicted in today's society of America, because history today is now known as what is documented from the past, but the problem resides in what was considered to be history in the past, simply because history in the past was literally what a sole individual made it to be. Now, this generation of people would inadvertently believe that that's how history should be, and I agree with you. However, I would add that generational past history differs from, say, for example, like LeBron James making history in one of his past championship games. Why? Well, merely due to how generational past history is formatted, in which it would teach generations of people a fictitious story of unforeseen information, a one-directional, or rather one-sided story told by a particular group of people in order to establish and maintain a deceitful hidden agenda of propaganda that will manipulate its readers or listeners into a system of theology and indoctrination. In other words, these particular individuals that provided this information told you what they wanted to tell you, no matter if it was based on any truths, facts, or their own opinions. It is called the illusion of power, whereas this illusion is that one group of people are somehow superior to others. What is also important to note here is that there are multiple different entities that are man-made, and history is one of them, along with various types of science, technology, and even many forms of religion. All of these social engineering experiments were cultivated by the same exact one set group of people that I mentioned earlier in order to compel the masses into adopting it. The ideology alone of their manipulative theoretical motives programs an individual to become prone with limits to their literacy and critical thinking capabilities. Not only were these same tactics utilized in the past, but these detrimental effects are currently being depicted as the norm in today's society. This form of role reversal began with Charles Darwin and his followers when they began to promote and teach the theory of evolution during the 1800s. As you may know, the theory of evolution is a scientific method in which Charles Darwin states the process of natural selection and pseudoscientific, blatantly racist information that he cultivated in relation to the world's population. Now, why would he do this? Well, it's definitely not about whether man came from monkeys, as society would love to point to you, so you can argue about this fictitious theory whenever it's brought up. No, it's more about the different traits of the human population, how different traits confer different rates of survival and reproduction, and also how these traits can be passed down from generation to generation. Now, you might be asking, so what does this have to do with our history being told to us in reverse? And my answer to that is everything, because Charles Darwin created this theory of evolution not because of the apes, but because he was a part of it. In other words, Charles Darwin's pseudoscientific theory was used to manipulate people into believing that they evolved from apes, but in all actuality, he was endeavoring to figure out where his species of people came from. This module will go on to formulate how this particular group of collective offspring will be able to continue forward in successive generations as the quote, survival of the fittest. See, you have to understand where Europe is located. Before it was called Europe, that particular landmass was, and still is, a part of Africa. And all of this correlates with some of the many things that were told to you in reverse. Like, for example, the out of Africa theory. Now, keep in mind that I just explained to you the hidden details behind Charles Darwin's theory, and just like his theory of evolution, the entire out of Africa theory is merely nothing but an indoctrinated form of manipulative pseudo-storytelling that was cultivated by the likes of a self-proclaimed prominent but yet fictitious bigoted scientist named Melville Jean Herskovits, an anthropologist of the early 1900s. Melville is solely responsible for expanding the lies of storytelling, in which in turn it was later considered to be American history, by completely reversing the records of historic information and also creating a fictional story about African slaves immigrating to the Americas by way of the Spaniards during the 1500s. This story was later known as the Middle Passage. However, prior to Melville's fictional story, no information existed in history that clearly mentioned that the so-called Negroes of the American lands came from Africa. For example, according to an English immigrant by the name of Noah Webster, who is the author of the Webster's English Language Dictionaries, the year 1828's definition of American is, quote, a native of America, originally applied to the Aboriginals, or copper-colored races, found here by the Europeans, but now applied to the descendants of Europeans born in America. Also, Melville allegedly took a trip to somewhere in Africa, meaning that there is absolutely no records of this, just a story, gathered up a few artifacts from there, observed a few tribes and a few cultures, and dubbed it as Africanism, then traveled back to the US, wrote a book called The Myth of the Negro Past, and published it in 1942 in the fictional section, where he claimed that the people of color in America somehow lost connection with their cultural past during the Middle Passage from Africa to the Americas. See, the people like Melville and the US government, along with the US public school system, wants you to believe that the lands of America were unoccupied prior to their arrivals. But the truth is that they were occupied by our ancestors, and not these people that they are referring to as Native Americans right now. Our ancestors were not of pale skin, but only dark to light brown skin complexions. The out of Africa theory, along with these fraudulent DNA tests from the 1900s, works hand in hand for one big reason: because they were created by the same group of people that forced you to believe that you came from Africa, when in fact millions of these Caucasians did not arrive to North America until the late 1700s. Hence the reason why the US Census did not begin the population count until the year 1790. And all of those records between the 1790 US Census and the 1830 Census were either lost or destroyed somehow. Side note, the Racial Integrity Act of 1924 gave government officials the permission to destroy those records to further hide the truth about who the real African Americans are, furthering the expansion of eugenics by manipulating millions of people into believing a lie. Another example of history that was told to you in reverse is that of the world maps. Over the years, several different maps were created, the majority of them to reflect imperialism and to exacerbate the size and importance of the ruling countries.
The Mercator projection has fostered European imperialist attitudes for centuries and created an ethnic bias against the Third World.
All world maps in today's history derived from the European traditional Mercator world map of 1569, and all of these maps are royally incorrect.
The map
enlarges areas at the poles to create straight lines of constant bearing or geographic direction.
So it makes it easier to cross an ocean.
But
Yes?
it distorts the relative size of nations and continents.
Are you saying the map is wrong?
Oh dear, yes.
They are, in fact, flipped upside down and shown to you in reverse, with the current hemispheres misrepresented, meaning that it distorts the size of objects, or rather continents, and also misplaces the location of a continent's position on purpose.
Here we have Europe drawn considerably larger than South America. When it's 6.9 million square miles, South America is almost double the size of Europe's 3.8 million.
Alaska appears 3 times as large as Mexico, when Mexico is larger by 0.1 million square miles.
Germany appears in the middle of the map when it's in the northernmost quarter of the Earth.
Wait. Relative size is one thing, but you're telling me that Germany isn't where we think it is?
Nothing is where you think it is.
Where is it?
I'm glad you asked.
This was done this way to give off the impression that the Western Europeans are superior to other races of people by being above the New World, or rather third world countries.
Salvatore Natoli of the National Council for Social Studies argues, in our society, we unconsciously equate size with importance and even power. In our society, we unconsciously equate size with importance and even power.
When third world countries are misrepresented, they're likely to be valued less. When Mercator maps exaggerate the importance of Western civilization, when the top of the map is given to the Northern Hemisphere and the bottom is given to the Southern, then people will tend to adopt top and bottom attitudes.
But wait, where else could you put the Northern Hemisphere but on the top?
On the bottom.
How?
Like this.
This misrepresentation of history and the many ways that it has been reversed has definitely affected our people's mentality, nationality, cultures, heritage, history, and even education. So there's no coincidence that this same one set group of racist people in America wants you to go back to Africa, all while consistently pushing the fictitious agenda into your conscious that Africa is where they immigrated your ancestors from. Because the truth is that they will want your attention on a different area of landmass for a bigger reason. And that reason is so you won't notice that America is truthfully your direct ancestors' mainland, and Africa is actually where their ancestors originally derived from, making them the real African Americans, due to the story being purposely told to you in reverse. I'm just here to make you think.